He said I was too small to matter. But in this town, I proved him wrong. This is my story. I arrived in Dusty Hollow with dust in my eyes and my heart in my throat. The stagecoach door creaked as I stepped down in my best dress, sun-bleached blue with yellow embroidery I'd sewn myself. I carried one bag, tied with a ribbon my mama gave me, and hope stitched tight into every seam of my clothes. The air in Dusty Hollow smelled like fresh earth and wood smoke, mixed with the dust of the unpaved road. As I stepped off the stagecoach, the clink of harnesses and the muffled chatter of settlers filled my ears, and the sun beat heavily on my shoulders. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was mine now. I was 21 and finally free. My name is Lizzie Campbell, and I am the only child of James and May Campbell, two convicts sent to Virginia in 1774. They found redemption, love, and hard labor on a small patch of land outside Richmond. I spent my life hoeing fields and hiding my thirst for color, music, and dance behind dirt-caked hands and aching arms. The smell of tobacco fields, damp with the morning dew, had always lingered in my memory, and the creak of old tools against worn earth was the sound of my youth. But freedom comes with a price, and mine was the unknown. Papa had seen the advertisement in a crumpled issue of the Richmond Weekly while in town for seed, just as whispers of rebellion began to stir in the streets. Tensions with the crown were rising, and our world, like the colonies, was teetering on the edge of something bigger than us. A man named Charles Whitford in the Kansas Territory needed a wife. God-fearing, hard-working, no-nonsense type, it said. Papa looked at me and said, "You're none of those things, but maybe that's just what he needs." It took all our savings to get me here, but when I stood before Mr. Whitford, my boots still dusty and my nerves trembling, he looked me up and down and said, "You're not what I expected." "Nor are you," I replied. He frowned. "You're too small. You look like you'd snap in a strong wind." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. My spirit wasn't small. I had survived back-breaking work, ridicule, hunger, and the sting of being born beneath the boot of society's judgment. But I couldn't let his words strike me again. I was a prisoner to someone else's judgment, and this time I wasn't going to bend to it. But he didn't see that. He turned and walked away, just like that, left me standing on the dusty road of the small town. I found a room behind the dry goods store, run by Mrs. Cartwright, a widow with rheumatic eyes and a no-nonsense mouth. "You can stay if you don't make noise and pay weekly," she said, glancing at me as though I were nothing more than a passing shadow. I had $7 left, not enough to return home, not enough to start much of anything. But I wasn't going back. Dusty Hollow was small. A church, a schoolhouse, a saloon, and a row of shops run mostly by men with wives who eyed me like I was made of poison ivy. The women didn't hide their judgment. They spoke in low voices when they thought I couldn't hear them, calling me the rejected bride and spinster behind gloved hands. To them, I was the outsider, and no more than a curiosity, a misfit from the start. I spent my first Sunday in the back pew of the church. That's where I first saw Reverend Jonathan Hale, new to town, tall, with a preacher's voice and scholar's eyes. He was too serious for someone his age, probably not yet 30. His face held the sternness of someone who carried the weight of duty and faith in his chest. But his eyes? There was something behind them, a question perhaps, that only he knew. After the service, I walked up to him and said, "Your sermon could use more joy." He blinked at me like I'd slapped him with a hymn book. "I mean no disrespect," I said, "but God made laughter too." And then I smiled, the smile that had always been too loud and too bold for women in my position, the smile I was learning to cherish, even when others looked at it like a sin. The weeks passed, and I needed work. I was quick and clever with needle and thread. Mama had taught me every stitch she knew. I offered repairs and mending for the townsfolk, and eventually, with enough saved, I opened a small corner in Mrs. Cartwright's shop, a place where folks could buy ribbons, laces, and little trinkets I stitched from scraps. I called it the sun-spun thread. Still, I was an outsider. The saloon girls whispered that I'd been cast off. The women at church offered clipped smiles and avoided sitting beside me. I could hear their murmurs, their veiled comments about my past, my boldness, the fact that I was still here, still standing. But the Reverend? He asked me to help with the children's class, the choir, and the sewing drives for needy families. He never once looked at me with pity, and somehow that was enough to start. One rainy day in late spring, he stopped by as I closed my little corner shop. "Miss Campbell," he said, hat in hand. "Yes, Reverend? I find myself in need of a wife." I choked on my breath. "Is that a proposal?" His face was as serious as the Old Testament. "I'm afraid so." I stared at him, uncertain whether this was the beginning of something real or another arrangement. "I don't mean to offend. The church board expects a pastor's wife, someone to organize gatherings, help with schooling, and sick visits. You already do those things." "So this is what? A business arrangement?" He nodded. "Essentially, unless, of course, you desire something else." Something in his voice hinted at warmth buried deep, but locked away. I should have laughed. I should have run. But instead, I said, "Let me think on it." That night, I lit a candle, knelt by my cot, and prayed. Not for guidance, but for courage. Some of me knew that if I said yes, I'd be stepping into something strange, solemn, and entirely new. I married Reverend Hale in the church's side chapel with no guests but Mrs. Cartwright and the schoolmistress. He wore black. I wore a dress I dyed from onion skins, deep gold, like sunlight through whiskey. There was no kiss, just a nod. We moved into the parsonage, where I slept in the spare room. He never asked to share mine. We were strangers with a common cause. But over time, something shifted. It was in the way he took his tea, 3 sugars, always, and how he smiled, just barely, when the children sang out of tune. He'd pause before each sermon, like listening for God's voice, and sometimes he played the organ late at night when he thought I'd gone to bed. And one night, I sang along. He stopped playing, but didn't scold. We grew into a rhythm. I tended the garden, and he studied by lamplight. I taught the girls embroidery and read books aloud to the sick. He let me host small gatherings at the church hall, music nights, sewing bees, song circles. People began to soften toward me, not all, but enough. He never touched me beyond what was proper. There was no hand on the small of my back or brush of fingers at the table. And yet, I caught him looking sometimes when I laughed or danced with the children under a lantern-lit summer sky. One night he said, "You were born to shine, Lizzie." I blinked at him. "Do you mean that?" He nodded, even if others can't see it. Weeks later, he fell ill, fever, cough, eyes glassy with pain. I sat by his bedside for 3 days, wiping his brow, reading from the Book of Psalms and humming old lullabies Mama used to sing. He grasped my hand in a rare moment of clarity and whispered, "Don't leave." "I won't." "No," he said again, firmer. "Don't leave me." And then he slept. When he woke, the fever broken, he looked at me like I was the only thing tethering him to this earth. We didn't speak of it again, but everything changed after that. He began bringing me wildflowers. A fiddle appeared one morning on the porch with a note. "I thought you might like to dance again." He started walking me home from church socials, even though we lived in the same house. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he touched my cheek. "This started as duty," he said, "but I think I've come to cherish you." Tears burned behind my eyes. I never wanted to be chosen out of obligation. "You weren't, not anymore." He kissed me gently, reverently, like a man discovering something sacred. So maybe I wasn't what Charles Whitford wanted. Maybe I was too small, loud, and full of life for someone else. But I was just enough for the man who mattered. And in a town that once turned away from me, I found a home, not in a house or a name, but in a partnership built slowly, deliberately, like a hymn sung on a quiet Sunday morning. I was never meant to be a bride bought by paper. I was meant to be loved, piece by piece. And I was. Hello, I'm Anna. Thanks for watching. Some stories begin with love. Others stumble their way there. Either way, thank you for walking this road with Lizzie. I hope you'll join me again soon for another timeless tale. Thanks for dropping in. Bye for now.